of having Ernesto Mireles as my mentor and one of my advisors for both my master's and my PhD as one of my readers. I'm really happy to be introducing Todd today. His leadership in the field of Chicano studies and in the, I'm going to mispronounce this word, Xicanada, is that right? Political action is, I think, fundamental and cutting edge to how we understand how social movements operate. I'm going to leave it to Todd to speak about his research, but I want to welcome you all and thank you all. So what will happen is we'll have about 45 minutes of presentation, some Q&A, and then around an hour from now, and I know everybody's in a different time zone, we'll move into the happy hour, and that will be faculty only. So thank you all for joining us.
How's everybody doing? My name is Ernesto Todd Mireles. As Serene was saying, on the faculty at Prescott College. I'm really happy that to be able to participate in this series showcasing faculty research and faculty work. Originally from Michigan, I received my PhD in 2014 from Michigan State University and came here to work at Prescott College. Well, actually, I was here before that, but and I've been here for the last 7 years now, working at Prescott College. I'm about to actually take my sabbatical this year. It'll start here pretty soon, and I'm super excited about that. And a large part of what I'm going to talk to you about today is some of the projects that I've been working on this past year during the pandemic, and also these are all projects that I'll continue during my sabbatical leave. And so, yeah, pretty pumped. But I'm just gonna get into the presentation. So I'm gonna do that real quick. This should only take a second. We'll find out here though. I hope that what you're seeing is just a slide that says organizing opportunities in the 21st century for the Xicanada. Like many people my age, I was in an undergraduate program in 1994. Actually, I was a little bit of a late bloomer, so I was a little bit older than the average student. But in 1994, there was an event that was very galvanizing. Not just to me, but to many people across the country, particularly those who were involved in Chicano movement politics. And that was the arrival of the Zapatista Army for National Liberation on the scene, January 1st, 1994, emerging out of the Lacandan jungle in defiance of NAFTA and neo-capital liberalism. And, you know, changed a lot of things. I think that, you know, it's right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and it had looked like, as I think his name was Fukuyama said, that we had reached the end of history, right? That capitalism had won, and that was the way the world was going to be, and so, you know, we needed to deal with it. And I think that the Zapatistas were resounding at that moment in terms of their reply to that, and it was a huge impact, right, on not just myself, but I think that whole generation. And so I'd like to think that a lot of the things that have happened to me since then personally are really sort of they're kind of an outgrowth of those formative political moments. And so yeah, this book, Insurgent Aztlán, is definitely an outgrowth of those formative political moments. It's really looking at the intersection, right, of literature, culture, politics, and you know, national resistance, national liberation resistance, particularly on the part of the colonized. And what I think is interesting is that there are actually two really good books that were written by a woman named Barbara Harlow, a professor out of Texas. And basically what Dr. Harlow says is that, and she wrote this these books were published just a few years before the Zapatistas in 1994. But basically Harlow was saying that this whole genre of resistance literature was closed, right? Because because of the fall of the Soviet Union, because of the fall of the Berlin Wall, that that these types of movements, these type of liberation movements, were a thing of the past now. And so, I think that's always the danger, like for anybody, certainly academics, I think, who should know better, to say, to try to be, super definitive about things like that, because clearly, the minute, and for any of those of you who have kids, you also know this is true. The minute you say that something's over, it's absolutely not over. And so, Insurgent Aslan is really an examination of sort of the spectrum of Chicano literature, looking at a lot of different things: film, myth, poetry, and really sort of trying to make a determination about whether or not Chicano literature is resistance literature, in the sense that it comes from a national liberation movement. And so I had a really good time writing this book, and I really like this book. I will tell you quite honestly that I've been surprised a little bit by the reaction to this book, which has been overwhelmingly positive. Also, it was published in January of 2020. Last year, it won an International Latino Book Awards, and actually placed second in the category that it came in. And so, I saw the other books that it was up against, and I mean, I was like, wow, which I thought was really cool. But the determination of the book really boils down to this, and I hope this doesn't stop anybody from buying it, that Chicano literature is resistance literature, but that it's resistance literature that belongs to a sort of like a proto-national liberation movement, right? I think it is a mistake to say that the Chicano movement rises to the level of national liberation movement. I think that the potential is there, and that's what I say in the book, and that's why it's titled Insurgent Aslan. The potential is there that this could happen, but it'll take time. And I think that one of the major factors, influencing that really has to do with the demographic growth that's happened in the in the last particularly in the last 20 years or so. I mean, actually, if you stop and think about it, in 1930, the 1930 census was the first time that the United States government asked people to identify themselves as Mexican. There were 3 million people in 1930 who identified themselves as Mexican in the US Census. In 1970, there were 7 million people that identified themselves as Mexican. And in 2010, there were somewhere around 30 million. Now that number has gone up even further. And so, I mean, at a certain point, just the sheer numbers require a certain investigation, right, into the political nature, the political status of a group of colonized people residing within the the confines of the United States. And so, I also like the slide is saying, I don't want to try to pretend like these ideas are new. They're not new. The practice of national liberation, the science and the practice, has been an intense topic of discussion for the past 100 years. But I think that there are some differences, right? As there are with any movement. I mean, you can't say that because this worked here, this will work there. But I think that the big part of it is like I was just talking about a second ago, the demographics, right? The demographics are going to change. I mean, in this country by 2030, Latinas will be the majority of the plurality in this country, because what we're really heading towards really is a society where there isn't one numerically dominant group, but there will be a plurality. And then, what happens then as a result of that? So, I mean, there's if we look at the last election, I mean, the big question after the last election was, who are these Latinos? Where did they come from? Why are there so many of them? Which, really, if you stop and think about it, is just an asinine question, right? Who are these Latinos? Who are these Chicanos? Like we just got here. I mean, that's part of the problem of the narrative, right? Is that we're constantly assuming or being assumed to be immigrants, right? Newcomers to this country. When the reality is that that is not true. That at no time in the history of this country since 1848, the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, have individuals who were of Mexican descent, who were citizens, been outnumbered by individuals who were not citizens. But I mean, if you look at popular culture, you would absolutely assume that that was completely the opposite. So when we think about this, like one of the questions I think that particularly that I'm dealing with in my research, has to do with this idea of politicizing the community, right? And I mean, primarily when we think about politics, I mean, it's really hard for us to escape this white settler colonial paradigm of Republican Democrat. And so, primarily what happens is that we see people in our community, working very hard, right, to maintain this sort of colonial structure in terms of politics. And as a matter of fact, really have a hard time talking about what politics looks like outside of this colonial structure. Like they can't imagine it. They have a hard time talking about it. They get very agitated about the question, And so part of what I've been trying to work through over the past, well, not just, that's not true over the past year. I mean, I've been working through it a lot longer than the past year, but I think the last year has really been much more of an intentional investigation into, this idea of political failure, right? I mean, are Chicanos political failures because they don't participate in mass in the settler colonial system, or are they actually political successes because there is this thread of conversation that has to do with national liberation that flows through the literature and through the organizing that's happening in different communities, right? And so like these three things say identity, after this last election, right? The biggest question was, who are the Latinos? And then the goals of the Chicano movement. I mean, are the goals of the Chicano movement greater access to settler colonial society or national self-determination, right? See, that's a legitimate question, but it's not one that people necessarily want to deal with, right? It's one that scares them, right? And on top of that, I think that the fear, and this is really one of those things where it's a fear of the unknown, because when you say that, like, what does that actually mean, right? What does it mean to be a self-determinative people within a colonial structure like the one that we see here in the United States? And is that even possible? Is it possible to be self-determinate and still be in a colonial relationship? And then the actions, the idea of creating viable national mobilizations based on liberation theories, right? So we see all sorts of like organizing projects that are happening all over the country, and people are doing really great work in the city that they live in. But I mean, the reality is until those locally based movements find a way to connect with each other, they are not challenging colonialism. Colonialism is a structure that exists on a continental level. Okay, so one of the ideas I just want to throw out to you real quick is this idea of internal colonialism. It says that the main difference between neocolonialism and internal colonialism is the source of exploitation. In the former, the control comes from outside the nation state, while in the latter, it comes from within. And so part of what we're trying to do, and we'll talk about a little bit more about, when I say we, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the projects that I have going from this past year, and that will move on with me through this next year. But I mean, if we are an internal colony, if Chicanos and other Latinos are an internal colony, then what that means, right, is that we're being controlled from within, right? So the struggle for liberation, all of that's happening, right, is happening, or it's being directed towards the system that's holding us down. We look at this quote over here. Cabral says that the national liberation of a people is the regaining of the historical personality of that people. It is a return to history through the destruction of imperialist domination to which they have been subjected. Okay. So this is actually a really interesting little piece that it's taken from. It's the speech is called The Weapon of Theory, and it's part of a speech that Cabral delivered in 1966 in Cuba at the Tricontinental Conference. And he's talking about, he's giving this really Marxist analysis of national liberation. But I think that what's important is that he's saying is that it is the regaining of the historical personality of that people. And what he means by that is the political personality of the people who are undergoing this national liberation process, right? Because you have colonialism. Okay, there's this moment of contact, there's this moment of disruption. A colonial system is established. At the moment that that colonial system is established, the history of the colonized ceases. Or at least this is what Cabral is saying, and I agree with him, right? We don't live as colonized people. We are not living our history right now. We are living the history of the colonizer. Now, that's not to say that we don't have important things that we've done or things or notable things or that we should be completely dismissed. What it means is that politically, we are not in control, right? So when we gain or we regain that historical personality, right, what we're doing is we're reestablishing ourselves as the people who are in control, right? So it is a return to history. When we return to history, we return as a national group, we return as a distinct people, right? Individuals do not return to history. Groups of people return to history, right? It's not internal, internally, one person subjected. It's internal colonialism. It's groups of people. And I think this is the part that we're having a hard time with these days, because we want to think of everything as being very personal. And there's no doubt that each of us have very personal relationships with these ideas, right? We've had things that have happened to us and that, some of them are good, but a lot of them are bad. But individually, we can't accomplish what Cabral is talking about. We can only do that as a group, as a nation, right? So, and he says that happens through the destruction of the imperialist domination to which they have been subjected. So, I mean, actually, when you think about it, that's also a pretty vague statement because there are lots of ways to destroy something. So what we're talking about is culture and we're talking about politics, right? Culture and politics are inseparable. They cannot exist without each other. And I think that this is also an extremely important point because in the world that we live in that attempts to commodify everything, right? We have, art for art's sake. And, we have things that are just cultural. This is cultural, man. Don't bring your politics into it. But they can't be separated. As a matter of fact, as long as there's culture, as long as there's someone who says, this is Chicano culture, right? That in and of itself is a political statement because what it does in saying that, what it does is it places itself in opposition, right, to settler colonial society. Guillermo Bonfil Batalla in his book, Mexico Profundo, he writes that there is a permanent confrontation in the Americas. And that permanent confrontation exists between Mesoamerica and Western civilization. And that confrontation will only end when one of them has destroyed the other. And so we see that confrontation is still ongoing. When we say that we're Chicano, when we say that we're indigenous, right? When we say that we're Mexican, what we're doing is we're placing ourselves in opposition to that system. Even if you don't really understand it or you don't know it when you're doing it, you're clinging to these old ideas, right? I mean, and think about it. Think about how many people have come from Ireland or how many people have come from Germany or how many people have come from Italy or other places, right? They don't, as a group, cling to these notions. It's because they have a different relationship with settler colonialism. Um, it's a little quote here from Mao. I think it's very important. He says, "Our job is not to recite our political program to the people, for nobody will listen to such recitations. But we must link the political mobilization for the war with the developments in the war and with the life of the soldiers and the people, and make it a continuous movement." Right? This is about. I think that my research is really touching on how it is that how is it that we do that, right? If we're talking about organizing and we're talking about organization, right? What are we organizing for? What are we building organization for? I mean, if we're not building it for power, then why are we building it, right? And again, it goes back to the question. I mean, are we trying to get greater access to settler colonial society, or are we working towards national self-determination and liberation? I mean, the questions are there, right? I mean, they're right in front of us. To me, they're obvious, right? But I mean, if you look at the reaction that they bring on, I think it also proves that other people think the same thing. They just don't want to say it. So, what does the Chicano movement mean, right? The political cultural education is the crucial task. This is the thing that we must do. We must be involved in political cultural education. So as a result of that, we propose as the mainstay of this organizing initiative to educate, mobilize, organize, and arm the whole of the people to take part in the resistance. The development of Chicano political will is crucial to cultural political victories. So the Chicano political will. Now, there's a phrase that you don't hear very often, right? And that's those are the questions, right? That's the thing, is that we can always name something, right? Naming something is sometimes that's the easy part. The question is what comes after the naming, right? So we've said we need to develop Chicano political will, right? But what does that mean? I mean, that's really the question. An organized political movement produces actionable power as a consequence of the mobilization of the people. Actionable power, power that can be acted upon. So part of what, in order to sort of like begin to frame this out, what I started thinking about was this idea of low intensity organizing, right? And so, because there's lots of different ways that people approach organizing. There's electoral organizing, there's union organizing, there's community organizing, there's student organizing. And there's all these different institutes that have created, like, this is the Midwest Institute for Organizing, and this is our model, and this is how you organize, right? And I think all that's great. What I also think is there are a lot of people out there who understand the basic skill set of being an organizer, right? There are certain things that you have to do in order to mobilize around an issue. I don't think that it's really that important as for us, like thinking about like how we do this within the Chicano movement. I don't think that what we need to do is teach people the skills of organizing, right? What we need to teach them is the strategy of change. How is it that we get from point A to point B? And it's not just from passing out flyers or having meetings or any of those things, right? I mean, it's really about and goes to fundamentally to this idea of education. So when we're looking at low intensity organizing, like part of when I was writing my book, Insurgent Aslan, I ran across this article that's listed down here at the bottom. It's called Low Intensity Conflict Environment of the 1990s, right? So I spent a lot of time reading in these military journals about insurgency and different things like that. And they're fascinating, right? And they're fascinating from the perspective that counterinsurgency, particularly, is about cultural disruption. Okay, it's about vying for, oh, like what was his name? I can't remember the general's name. The hearts and the minds, right? And so, thinking about how it is that you do that, but this low intensity conflict's a little bit different, right? because it's talking about conflict is viewed as a long-term endeavor, and therefore strategy and tactics must be flexible and adaptive. I mean, what this is really talking about is creating a situation in an area, this low intensity conflict, that basically the living conditions become unmanageable, right? It's not like a whole bunch of people are being slaughtered or there are pitched battles or anything like that. It's that there's always something happening that keeps people from being able to achieve what it is that they need to in order to, have a decent life, right? That's the idea of it, right? That's the idea of how it is through this low intensity conflict, that populations get tired and then they give up over a period of time. So what I started thinking about was what if organizing was low intensity, right? So instead of everything being about like, you know, we're going to get this person elected, or we need to sign this union contract, or everything in organizing is very goal oriented, right? Like, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. So part of the problem is, and I say this as a person who's been an organizer, a professional organizer for almost 30 years now, or close to 30 years anyway, um, is that what I have watched happen over and over again, right, is that the energy that is built up through these very like goal oriented organizing campaigns, it just dissipates immediately afterwards. I mean, look at the presidential election. Millions of people are mobilized to elect one person to the office. And as soon as that person is elected, where do all of those millions of people go who were so concerned about the political future of the country just a few weeks ago? I mean, they all go home, right? That energy dissipates, and it dissipates on purpose, because we don't live in a political system that is set up for that type of um, continuous engagement, right? That's where the irritation then comes in, but it comes in a completely different way. So how is it that we, through the Chicano community, create situations of low intensity organizing, and what does that entail, right? So part of what low intensity organizing entails, or some of the values, right, is and we're thinking about this as a whole piece, to train organizers to work in the Chicano indigenous community. Okay. So, and I think earlier, like I was saying, we're not just training them in terms of teaching them how to, hand out flyers or run a meeting. What we're doing is training them to think about organizing strategically, which I think is a very different thing. Politically educate the Chicano indigenous community, right? Build a vehicle for the political expression of the Chicano indigenous community. Organize Chicano indigenous communities to answer back some of the more serious attacks: immigration, school reform, imprisonment of our youth. And this final one, I think, is the most important, but I also think it's the one that we haven't really done, right? Like, we haven't made a super serious attempt at this. And the people who have, I think, that organization exists for a while, and then it's absolutely co-opted, by money and by all these other things, right? So, and I mean, part of the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how do we keep that from happening? So we organize a broad front political machine that will work to teach advocacy and self-reliance through education and creation of policy that strengthens the Chicano indigenous community, right? See, in my mind, this is what makes up a lot of this idea of low intensity organizing, because none of these things are something that will ever end. They're all goals. It's like a goalless practice, kind of. That's the way that I think that when we think about organizing in the Chicano community, we should think of it as a goalless practice, right? Because these are things that have to happen over and over and over again, right? I mean, people are like, oh, we need a better world. We need to defeat capitalism. Well, I'm telling you right now, you ain't going to defeat capitalism next week, and you ain't going to defeat it the week after, or the week after, or the month after, or the year after, right? I mean, this is an ongoing process where people in our community have to be confronted with alternative information, not alternative facts, but alternative information, information that they're not going to get from the approved channels of settler colonial education, right? And so we have to think this through. And so what does it mean to create all these things? So when we think about failure, all right, and then so my question would be, what does success look like? Well, I believe that success is about embracing indigeneity. I think that by doing that, it exposes the lie that Chicanos and Latinos are mainly immigrants. And that I believe that this distortion, right, of who we are, where we're from, contributes to our lack of political power. And then Chicanos and Latinos regain and see the Chicano struggle within a national and international context. I think that for mostly good intentions, that in our communities that we find a way to constantly scale down the movement instead of scaling up the movement. I think that it is this whole like fascination or fetishization, I think, is probably a better way of the community. Like everybody is always like, oh, I'm the expert of my own experience, right? Okay, no shit, I'm the expert of my own experience, right? I mean, how does that challenge capitalism? How does that challenge the state? It doesn't, right? I mean, absolutely 100%, it's given that we're all the expert of our own experience, right? But that's not a return to history. That's not a return to nation, right? That's not a return to self-determination. It's not even a return to individual self-determination, because actually nothing has changed about our material condition, right? So we have to sort of take this piece about the community and put it in its proper place, right? Because it's not the top of the pyramid. And I mean, it's important, right? I mean, our communities need to be strong, but it's not the top of the pyramid. And so when we regain that national and international context, right, then what we begin to see is that we are a distinct and individual people, right? And that we have a political position within this settler society, right? We are not without politics. And I think that's the important part, right? And when I say politics, I don't mean Democrat and Republican. I mean our politics. I mean Chicano politics, right? The kind of politics that produce actionable power that allows us to build towards nation, that allows us to build towards these ideas of self-determination. So some of the organizations this past year that I helped start this nonprofit. It's called Mexicanos 2070. The organization was founded on a paper written by Armando B. Rendon. The title of the paper was The Blueprint for the Next 50 Years. The goal of this organization is to create a think collective, right? And through this think collective, we would begin to work with other organizations, to build this broad front, right? How do we bring these different organizations together and not to subsume them, right? That's not the goal, right? The goal is to bring them together. And as I talked a little bit in the abstract for the talk about that Japanese corporation style Keiretsu, right? And basically what that is it's a horizontal style with these different corporations who all have some sort of interest in the production of whatever the thing is that everybody is making. They come together but not vertically, horizontally, and they create this network, right, of organizations that work, or corporations that work to support these particular products, or the idea or the production of these products, right? And that's really one of the models that we're trying to incorporate with this, and to think about it, like when we say broad front, what is it that we mean? So part of what we've been doing for Mexicanos 2070 is we have monthly webinars. We actually have a webinar tomorrow. We have 3 experts on the Treaty of the Guadalupe Hidalgo who will be speaking 1 o'clock tomorrow. That's 1 o'clock Arizona time. We launched a project in September called the Colegio Chicano del Pueblo, which I'll talk about in a second. And on March 31st, we are presenting the first Aztlan report, which will be a report back to the community, a national report back. And we'll have organizations from all over the country coming in to report on the different things that they're doing. The Colegio Chicano del Pueblo was launched on September 16th, 2020. Currently, there are not 638 students. I think there are now 600 and about 45 students. We've had several students sign up in the last couple of days. It is a free online Chicano studies college. We started on September 16th with 2 courses. On January 10th, we expanded to 6 courses. We will have 15 courses by May 1st and 30 courses by December 2021. I'm very confident that we are on track to hit these numbers. We also signed a memorandum of understanding with Prescott College, who, keeping in its longstanding tradition of advocating for social justice, has agreed to create and has created a pathway to college credit for students who are completing these courses through the Colegio. I think that would also be remiss of me if I didn't tell you that we signed up 600 these students off of 1 press release. That's all we've ever sent out is 1 press release. And, people went crazy, right? So when we think about these ideas of low intensity organizing, right, what we have to do is we have to train organizers. We have to politically educate the community. We have to begin to build organizations, right, that are going to politically mobilize or galvanize the community, and not for Republicans or Democrats, right, but for us, right, for Rasa. That's the thing. How do we do this, right? So we want to take that energy. I mean, think about it. Think about it. If Chicanos, Mexicanos, Latinos, whatever, if they worked as hard for themselves as they do for white politicians, we probably wouldn't be having this conversation right now, right? So with, the El Partido Nacional de la Raza Unida, right, the Raza Unida Party, which, was created in the late 1960s and the early 70s, had some real success, has, kind of shrunk. There was a chapter in Pacoima. My very good friend Ernesto Ayala and his father and his family were some of the main people that were keeping it alive, and who did keep it alive. And so, one of the things that we've done is that we've reestablished the National Central Committee. We hold membership study groups, and we're working on chapter development. Now, see, this is one of the things, like, the pandemic has been bad, but this is actually one instance where the pandemic really worked in our favor, right? Because now, instead of having to go around to all these different cities, which is what people would have expected before, now we just throw out the Zoom link and people from all these different cities come into the meeting, And so, I mean, it also is redoing the way that we think about organizing. So the big, what's that thing called? Sabbatical project for this fall or this year is this. I mean, this is one of them anyways. The Raza Unida platform and message development. I mean, we're rewriting the entire political platform for Raza Unida. And I think in some ways for, for a large part of the Chicano movement, right? And so what we're doing is we're going to design and implement a focus group study using newly written platform positions from La Raza Unida Party to develop grassroots political messaging for the Chicano community. I mean, I expect that we'll have these, we'll hold the focus groups over the summer and have this paper written and published, sometime this fall. And so, I mean, part of what, if we look over here in the corner too, we talk about Chicano studies research, we talk about Chicano studies. I think that this also has a lot to do with just Chicano organizing in general. I've taken these questions from an article that was written by Ronaldo Macias, who is a professor at UCLA, and who I've had the pleasure of the last couple of months really spending some time talking to. But Profe Macias, his article is about Chicano studies, and he said that Chicano studies deals with three main questions, right? Who are we? What is our material condition? And what can we do about it? So even in terms of everything that we're talking about, right? If we take those three questions and lay that over the top of the rest of the framework that's being developed, what we're starting to do, I believe, is develop a very nuanced political stance, right? That is separate from the politics of settler colonial society, right? It doesn't mean that we're not affected by those politics. It doesn't mean that necessarily that we can even escape them. But we can have a conversation that is about us and not about them. That part I absolutely believe. When we think about this, right, part of what we're doing is really heightening the contradictions, right? And this gets back into, the organizing. I think that this becomes a very important focus of the research and the academic work, okay? Because, in the society that we live in, everybody is constantly trying to flatten contradictions. Oh, we need to all get along. If those people would just stop thinking that way, right? But, heightening contradictions, right, that dialectic, the whole idea of questioning to arrive at the truth, right, or the idea, I think, even of Ponche Bay, right, to arrive at the root of the truth, right? How do you arrive at the root of the truth if you are not questioning, right? So heightening contradictions is a strategy to prepare people for confrontational tactics. Now, unfortunately, when people hear the word confrontation, they think that it means a fight, okay? And it does, but it doesn't necessarily mean a fist fight, but it's a confrontation, because sometimes things must be confronted. So if we prepare our people, if we prepare our community, right, and we do that through education and through training and through building these organizations, right, then it might not necessarily have to be as bad as people necessarily think, right? Exposing contradictions between opposing groups is based on the fundamental belief in the irreconcilable differences in values, beliefs, and most of all, interests. I believe that there are irreconcilable differences between settler colonialism and the Chicano movement. I also believe that there is a permanent confrontation between Mesoamerican society and Western civilization, or Western society in the Americas. Those things are irreconcilable. They cannot be brought together, right? One will exist or the other one will exist. And the question is still to be determined. So those are the big projects that I have going on. These are some other ongoing projects. I'm developing with a group of people a website or a project called War of the Flea Media. And we're developing this website, which is waroftheflea.org. I mean, we're looking at doing all of these things through that, particularly a series of documentaries. We have the Reality Dysfunction podcast, which publishes weekly. We will publish our 100th episode in June of 2021. This podcast is dedicated to Chicano Latino politics. It's what we talk about, or it's what we try to talk about. But I'll tell you, the longer that you talk about Chicano Latino politics in the world that we live in, the more you realize that, our politics are very limited, right? It's hard to talk about this without talking about white politicians. War of the Flea, Fight for Chicano Studies, the documentary that I've been working on. And I'm also starting my second book project. Starting is not really true. I've already started it. My second book project called Xicano Revolt, the in-depth examination of the Mecha student movement in Lansing, Michigan in the 1990s. So, and just roll through these real quick. I don't know where I had a video hooked onto this for you guys. Oh, there it is. Oh, wait a minute. The video's not gonna work. Sorry. It's not gonna work because I didn't turn the sound on. But next time. And then this is sort of the lead-in for the Reality Dysfunction. This is a little page about the War of the Flea. there's a video that also goes with this too. There's a trailer. Actually, hold on a second. I would really like for you guys to see this trailer. I'm gonna try this again. This time I'm gonna make sure that the sound is up.
How do you not teach Xicano studies and call yourself an educational institution?
Okay, I should have played with that one a little bit more. But this is Dr. Teresa Melendez. She's the founder of Chicano Latino Studies at Michigan State University. This is a quote from her interview. And then Chicano Revolt, again, my second book project. This is a sort of a little abstract for it. This is a news clip that I have from that time talking about Cesar Chavez Avenue. There was a push in the early 90s in Lansing, Michigan, to rename one of the streets downtown Grand Avenue. After that happened, there was a pushback by the white community, and they forced a vote on Cesar Chavez Avenue, and they resoundingly voted that down and changed it back to Grand Avenue. For the next 20 some years, many of us in the community worked very hard to change that. And it wasn't until just like within the last 2 or 3 years that the city council overturned that. So in closing, there's some milestones, as in terms of testimonials. I think that it's non-exaggeration to say that hundreds of Chicanos, Chicanexes from around the country are involved in these projects. If you're interested in getting involved, you can email me. This is sort of a timeline for what I have going on. In 2020, we launched Mexicanos. September 2020, launched the Colegio. By June or July of this year, I should have a rough draft of the documentary. By October, we hopefully will have finished this focus group study. And then by May of 2022, I'm hoping to have a rough draft of Chicano Revolt done. And then final thoughts on low intensity organizing. As it says, exposing contradictions between groups is based on the fundamental belief. We read that one already. The greater the amount of pressure, the more incentive there is to resolve it. And again, organizing a broad front. And so I'm going to leave you with Mao and Arafat. In the absence of certain definite conditions, quick victory is something that exists only in one's mind and is not in objective reality. And that Yasser Arafat said, people are the greatest resource. And that is all I have in terms of my presentation.
All right. Thank you, Todd, for that really wonderful presentation. Incredibly informative, incredibly powerful. My brain's a little mind-boggling. I think, I wish we could give you that standing ovation that you definitely deserve right now. We do have a few questions for you.
Okay.
And the first is, can you talk more about how the settler colonial project's impact can be seen and felt and heard in educational institutions, specifically as it relates to the Chicano and indigenous communities?
Well, I mean, I think it's basically understanding and recognizing that the history that we live in is not our own, right? And I mean, it's very clear because, I mean, when students protest for Chicano studies, I mean, they want history classes, they want this, they want that, and so it's just, I mean, the impact is there. I think it's not just there; it's fundamental. And I think that when we think about it in terms of like hegemony, or I think actually a better way to think about it is common sense, right? I mean, it's common sense in our educational system that people need to know who George Washington is, that they need to know who Thomas Jefferson is, right? That's just common sense. Like, why would you even question that? That it's important to know who the presidents of the United States are, right? That's because that's the history that's being recorded right now. And so I think that, once you start to look at it like that, then I think that, its impact or its influence, I mean, it's just right there. It's everywhere. It's all over us. There's no escaping it.
So What are the lessons we can take from this and apply it to something like Palestinian liberation?
Oh, I think that the lessons are coming the other way. I think they're coming from the Palestinians to us. I don't think that they're necessarily coming from us to them. Um, I think that it's very clear that the Palestinian struggle has been one for nation and for land and, for self-determination and autonomy, for the right of return to lands that they were dispossessed from. I mean, I think that um, these are all important factors, right? That Chicanos and I think other Latinos in the Americas, right, really need to uh, to look at and to think about how does that impact what we're doing here, and I just want to be really clear. I'm not saying that we should get a history book and follow exactly what they did, right? Because that's a different place, it's a different group of people. There's a whole bunch of things that are different, and I think that's part of the conundrum. It's part of the struggle, is that we have to figure out a way to we have to figure out a way for ourselves, right? Like Fanon says, that every generation out of relative obscurity, right, has to find their purpose, and that they either succeed or they fail at that. And I think that's I think it's really true.
Wonderful. Last question, and just a reminder to folks that you can put your questions in the chat. We still have a few minutes. How does the Chicano movement relate to the Black Lives Matter movement or other indigenous and native peoples movements? Are they separate? Are they working on the same issues? Is there communication? Like, can you kind of give us a analysis of what the lay of the land looks like?
I mean, I can give you what it looks like to me. I think that's important to start that conversation. Um, I mean, I think that to the extent that we're talking about fundamental human issues, like the right to exist, once you exist, the right to continue existing, um, I think that they're very much the same. I mean, clearly I think that the American imaginary, the U.S. imaginary, is it's much more obsessed with Black people than it is with Chicanos or other Latinos, and I do mean obsessed. Um, I think that and these kinds of questions are tough because sometimes it can really get into those, like, who's oppressed more, right? And that's not the purpose of this at all. I think that yeah, I mean, so in some ways they're the same, but in some ways they're not, right? I mean, when you're talking about Chicanos, when you're talking about indigenous people, I mean, you cannot dismiss the issue of land, right? You cannot dismiss the issue of sovereignty, and that's just not an issue that has really existed in the Black experience in this country. And so, I mean, there's some differences, right? I think that yeah, well, I think that's kind of the biggest one. I also think it's the reason why Chicanos, especially at the well, I'm very interested to hear how that's not true, but let me finish this statement. Um, what was I going to say? Uh, yeah, I guess I can't remember what I was going to say, but I am really interested in hearing how that's not true, if that person is still on.
I don't know if they can speak, and we're actually coming up on the hour mark
Okay.
to move this into a faculty happy hour. So if there's any just like last minute shorter questions, you can put them in the chat. And if not, we're going to ask in just a couple of minutes for non-faculty to head out so our faculty can do some community building together. But if there's any last minute questions, and as to the student trying to ask that question, we will definitely follow up, and I will connect you with Todd via email. I know both of you, so it won't be a problem.
Sure, I would love to have that conversation.
Wonderful.
Very interested in what you have to say.
Yeah, so we'll definitely do that over email just in the interest of time. But any last questions? All right, I think we're good. Todd, thank you so much for joining us for
Yeah.
the first in the faculty speaker series. This has been wonderful, super informative, super educational, very powerful. I'm a little mind boggled. It's going to take me some time to deal with this, which seems to happen every time I hear a lecture from you, and learn from it and break it down. For those of you who are not faculty, thank you so much for joining us for the first hour. He definitely did set a high bar for these moving forward. The next one is in next month. We'll be doing these every month, and I believe the next speaker is, let me pull that out of my notes, which of course I lost right, when I needed them. We'll have the next speaker in just a couple of weeks in March, I think March 17. I don't know if that person is here, but if they want to add any notes into it, that would be wonderful. And we have information up on the Facebook page. Very, very excited that we were able to have this connection. Yep, here it is. March 17, Mary Jackson, Associate Faculty and Program Coordinator of the Outdoor Education Leadership MA, will be presenting on adventure and embodiment of place. So please mark your calendars for that. And as for now, I think we're good. And for non-faculty, feel free to, yes, we will have many conversations about land and all of those things. But for non-faculty, we invite you to, join us next time, and we'll see you next time. And for now, this next section is just faculty only.